And all of my friends always wanted to come to our house, because our house was the place where there was no judgment, it was fun, we always had a good time, there was always something to eat for everybody. And particularly, it was a happy, exciting, beautiful place. And I always wondered about how could a man leave a woman with 3 boys under the age of 4 when he was perfectly capable of staying and working. There was a war going on at that time and so on. And he spent quite a few years of his life in prison. And, and I had this gnawing internal kind of desire to meet this man and to find him. And I used to dream about him. I was filled with anger about him and so on. And the turning point in my life came when I shifted my perceptions about my father. My father, all I knew was his name. His name was Melvin Lyle Dyer. I knew he was born in 1914. I used to go to sleep at night and dream about meeting him. I used to wake up filled with anger, sweating sometimes. I would have these dreams where I would fight with him in my sleep. And I'd wake up just soaking wet, filled with anger. And in all of those years, up until I was 34 years old, in 1974, I dreamt about him almost every single night. And I always would ask my mother to see if she could tell me something about him. Where was he? She never wanted to. She's just filled with rage towards this man. So I got a note in 1974 or 73 informing me that my father, this was from a cousin that I didn't know I had. Her name was Dorothy Phillips. And she told me that my father had died 10 years before, 1964, at the age of 49, of cirrhosis of the liver. And that he was buried in Biloxi, Mississippi, and that he died in New Orleans. And that's all the information that she had. Well, my 2 brothers never wanted to hear a word about my father, I think partly because they remembered him. They were a year and 2 years older than me, and they didn't want any part of it. I had this sort of very innate kind of powerful inquisitiveness about who was this person. And more than anything, I wanted to know how could he do it? And did he acknowledge that he had 3 sons? Actually, I just wanted to know if he acknowledged that he had a son named Wayne. And I was teaching at that time. I was a professor at St. John's University in New York. I was teaching counseling psychology. And that was the time of a lot of the things that Lyndon Johnson had put into effect, called the Great Society, and they were integrating some of the southern schools and so on. And I was given a job with the federal government, a temporary job, to just a part-time thing to go along with my professorship. I was to fly down to a place in Mississippi called the Mississippi State College for Women in Columbus, Mississippi. And I thought to myself, I had just found out recently, I don't even know exactly how far back it had been, but I had found out that my father had died. And I looked on a map and I saw that Columbus was only 200 miles from Biloxi, and I knew that my father's body had been shipped as an indigent from New Orleans to Biloxi. So I got down to Columbus, and I sat in on classes and I wrote up my report on the civil rights laws and whether they were being honored and so on. And then I rented a car, and it was a Friday afternoon. And the car that I rented was a 1974 Dodge Coronet. It was blue. And in those days, they only had the lap belts. They didn't have the shoulder belts, the shoulder harness. So this car, as weird as this all sounds, and my life at that time was really shaky. I was drinking. I wasn't in a good kind of relationship I wanted to be in. My writing wasn't, I just couldn't seem to put it all together. I was overweight. I had very little discipline. And I was very much ego involved in my life. And, but I always knew I had a different kind of a destiny, and I just couldn't seem to get it. And this stuff with my father was always there, this internal kind of rage. And so I went, I got in this car, and the car was at a Avis rent-a-car place, and nobody had ever rented the car before. Nobody had ever driven the car before. It had 0 miles on the odometer, like 0.6 or something. It had been trucked in that day to be rented by me. So I rented this car, I got in, and I went to put on the seat belt, and I put the left belt on, and then I reached under to get the right belt, and there was no right-hand belt. Now, I was a fanatic about wearing seat belts and so on, so I got out of the car, and I wanted to find this belt, and I took the seat out, and I put it on the ground, and there, taped to the floorboard of the car, was a plastic, wrapped in plastic was the buckle. And there was a rubber band around it, and the whole thing with masking tape was taped to the floorboard of the car, I guess to protect it from cutting the upholstery or whatever. So I took the stuff out, I took the rubber band off, I got the whole thing out, I put it up, put the seat in, reached in to put the buckle on, and inside of the buckle, there's a business card in this brand new car. And I looked at the card, and it said, Candlelight Inn, Biloxi, Mississippi. And on the back, there was a map imprinted on how to get to this Candlelight Inn. And I just had one of those flashing kinds of strange moments and said, that's weird. But I didn't think any more about it. I just put it in. I said, somebody at the factory, whatever it is. And I put it in my pocket. I said, but I'm going to Biloxi. So I drove to Biloxi. It was a Friday afternoon, and at the end of August. And I pulled into the outskirts of Biloxi. Welcome to Biloxi. And I pulled over, and there was a gas station there. I drove into the gas station. There was a telephone with a yellow pages. And I went and looked up cemeteries. It's the only clue I had. And there were 3 listings. 2 very large listings and 1 real small minor listing. So I called the 2. There was no answer at the first. Nobody answered at the cemetery. Second one I called was busy. So I called this tiny little number, and this man came on. And I said, and he had a southern drawl, and I said, I'm calling to find out if there's a Melvin Lyle Dyer who died in 1964. I believe that was the exact date. And would he be buried at your cemetery? And he said, well, this isn't really a cemetery, but they do bury people here. He said, I'll check. And he was gone for at least 10 minutes. And he came back, and he was rifling through Coca-Cola boxes that they had brought Coca-Cola, and this is how they filed things in Mississippi in those days. And he said, I found your father's record. He was buried here in 1964. I said, well, I'm on a journey as my father. I've been searching for my father for my whole life. I would just like to go to, where he's buried. He said, well, it's not really a funeral home. He said, your father is buried on the grounds of the Candlelight Inn. True story. So I reached in my pocket, and I said, I've got a map. And I drove to this little place. This was like the turning point in my life, and when I began to believe in the active side of infinity. And I went to this little marker on the ground. There wasn't even a gravestone there, just a little marker. And it said Melvin Lyle Dyer. I'm not exactly sure of these dates, but I'm pretty sure it's 1914, 1964. And I stood there, and when I went in, the man said, well, he said, you can leave. When you do, just put the chain up over the fence and over the driveway with it. And I said, okay. And I was there. It was about 5:15 or so. And I stayed there for almost 3 hours. It was dark now. It was 8 o'clock. And I just cursed at my father. And I just stomped on the ground. And I just said, how could you have done this? And what was in your mind? And how could you just leave? And why didn't you ever call? And what? And it was like this tearful, very powerful turning point. Peak experience in my life. And then something came over me, and I remember what Mark Twain said about forgiveness. He said, forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. And something came over me that had never come over me before, and I said to my father, I forgive you. I don't know why. I said, from this moment on, for the rest of my life, I will send